Emma sat on her porch, staring at the small, rusted key in her hand. The stray cat had dropped it at her doorstep just moments ago, its bright green eyes locked onto hers before disappearing into the night. It wasn't the first time. For the past few days, the same scruffy cat had been bringing her things. Small, insignificant objects, or so she thought at first. A button, a marble, an old locket. But this key was different. It felt heavier in her palm, not in weight, but in something else. A strange, unshakable feeling settled inside her, like this wasn't random, like the cat wanted her to find something. She turned the key over, running her thumb along the rusted edges. It looked old, worn by time, and something about it tugged at a memory she couldn't quite reach. The cat had come to her doorstep out of nowhere just a week ago, sitting there like it had always belonged, watching her with an eerie familiarity. She never fed it, never tried to call it inside, yet it kept coming back. And now it was bringing her these gifts. Emma glanced around, hoping to see the cat again, but the street was empty, the dim glow of the street lamp casting long shadows across the pavement. She sighed, gripping the key tightly as she stepped inside her small house. It had been quiet for too long, just her and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Ever since James had passed, silence had become her unwanted companion. She set the key on the table and sank into her chair, staring at it. Who did it belong to? Why would a stray cat have it? A ridiculous thought crossed her mind. What if James had something to do with this? She shook her head, pushing away the idea. James was gone. And yet, her heart clenched at the thought of him. He had always been the kind of man who left things unfinished, little mysteries that she never fully unraveled. This felt like one of them. She exhaled sharply and pushed herself up from the chair. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a stray cat with a habit of collecting junk. Or maybe it wasn't. The next morning, Emma found herself standing by the door earlier than usual, half expecting the cat to return. She wasn't sure why she cared so much. It was just a stray, after all, but the key still sat on the table where she had left it, and something about it wouldn't let her move on. Just as she turned away, a soft rustling sound made her freeze. She opened the door, and there it was, the same scruffy cat, sitting on the porch, its green eyes steady, almost expectant. In its mouth it carried something wrapped in brittle, yellowed paper. Emma hesitated before kneeling down. The cat didn't flinch, didn't run. It simply dropped the object at her feet and sat back, tail curling neatly around its paws. She picked up the fragile paper, careful not to tear it, and unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded note, faded with time, the ink barely visible. She swallowed hard as she slowly unfolded it, her breath catching when she saw the name written at the top. James. Her heart pounded. The handwriting. She would recognize it anywhere. It was his. The letters slanted just the way they always had, the ink slightly smudged at the corners, as if his fingers had brushed over the words while he wrote. But that didn't make sense. This note looked old, far older than it should be. She ran her fingers over the delicate paper, her eyes scanning the words. It was short, hurried. I tried, I really did. If you ever find this, please understand. I never stopped looking. I hope you can forgive me. Emma's hands shook as she lowered the note, her throat tightening. What had he been looking for? And why would a stray cat bring this to her? She turned back to the cat, but it was already walking away, its tail flicking in the air like it had finished what it came to do. But she knew this wasn't over. She looked down at the note again, then at the key still sitting on the table inside. A deep unease settled in her chest. These weren't just random objects. They meant something. And if James had written this, it meant there was something he had left behind, something she was meant to find. Emma barely slept that night. The note sat on her bedside table, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw James's handwriting, heard his voice in the back of her mind. I tried. I really did. Tried what? What had he been searching for? And how had this note ended up in the mouth of a stray cat? By morning, exhaustion clung to her, but she was already moving before she had time to think. She needed answers. She gathered the small collection of objects the cat had brought her over the past week. The button, the locket, the marble, and now, the note and the key. She spread them out on the kitchen table, staring at them like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Her fingers traced the locket first. It was old, its gold surface scratched and dull. She pried it open, expecting to find a picture of James or maybe a familiar face from the past. But inside there was nothing. Just emptiness. A hollow space where something had once been. Her chest tightened. Had there been a picture? Had it been removed? The marble was next. Smooth and cloudy, like the kind children used to play with decades ago. It reminded her of stories James had told her, about growing up in a tiny house just a few streets away, about playing marbles in the dirt with his little sister. Her breath caught. His sister. Emma's fingers trembled as she picked up the note again, reading it over and over. I never stopped looking. James had never talked much about his sister, only that she had been a part of his childhood, and then one day she was gone. Emma had assumed she had moved away, that life had simply taken them in different directions. But what if it had been something else? A soft thump pulled her from her thoughts. She turned toward the door. The cat was back. This time, it didn't bring anything. It simply sat there, watching her, waiting. Emma grabbed the key from the table, her heart pounding. The cat had led her this far. Maybe it was trying to lead her somewhere else. She stepped outside, locking eyes with the cat. It flicked its tail once, then turned and padded away. Emma followed. The cat moved with quiet purpose, slipping through the narrow streets as if it had walked this path 1,000 times before. Emma followed, her pulse quickening with every step. The morning air was cool, but she felt a strange heat rising inside her, a nervous energy she couldn't explain. She wasn't sure how far they had walked when she realized where they were. The old neighborhood. The place where James had grown up. The cat stopped in front of a house at the very end of the street. Emma froze. She knew this house. She had seen it in old photos James had shown her, back when it still had a white picket fence and flower beds under the windows. But now the fence was gone, the paint was peeling, and the windows were dark and empty. It looked abandoned, untouched for years. Emma swallowed hard, gripping the key in her palm. Was this why the cat had brought it to her? She hesitated only a moment before stepping onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath her weight. The cat brushed against her leg, then leapt onto the windowsill, watching her. She reached for the doorknob. It was locked. Her fingers tightened around the rusted key. She slid it into the lock. A deep breath. A turn. The door creaked open, revealing a dim, dust-covered room. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood and time. Sunlight filtered in through cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Emma stepped inside cautiously. The house was empty, stripped of furniture, but the walls still held echoes of the past. Faint marks where picture frames once hung. Scratches on the wooden floor from a chair that had been pushed back too many times. She moved deeper inside, her footsteps careful, her eyes scanning the space. Then she saw it. A small wooden box tucked into the corner of the room. Her heart pounded as she knelt beside it. Dust coated the lid, but she could still make out the faint carvings along the edges. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the surface. James had been here. The cat let out a soft meow, as if urging her on. With trembling hands, Emma lifted the lid. Inside the box, neatly stacked and wrapped in aged ribbons, were letters. Dozens of them. The paper was brittle, yellowed with time. The ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. James. Emma's breath caught as she picked up the first letter, unfolding it with shaking hands. I know I won't stop until I find you. I don't care how long it takes. I just need to know what happened. She pressed a hand to her mouth, a lump forming in her throat. These weren't just letters. These were messages James had written to someone he had lost, someone he had been searching for. His sister. Emma's hands trembled as she flipped through the letters, reading each one. They spoke of regret, of guilt, of endless searching. James had spent years trying to find his sister, following dead ends, chasing whispers from people who barely remembered her name. I should have protected you. I was supposed to look after you. The weight of his words pressed down on Emma's chest. He had never told her. Not once in all their years together had he mentioned how much this haunted him, how much of his life had been spent looking for someone who had simply disappeared. She reached deeper into the box and found a small, leather-bound journal. Flipping through the pages, she saw lists of names, addresses, and scribbled notes. Places James had searched, people he had questioned. He had been so close. Then, near the end of the journal, a sentence stood out, underlined twice. I think I finally found her. Emma's pulse raced. He had written this just a few weeks before he passed. She clutched the journal, her mind spinning. If James had found her, why hadn't he told Emma? Why had he stopped? Had something happened? Had he run out of time? She glanced at the cat, sitting quietly by the doorway, its green eyes steady, almost knowing. It had led her here for a reason. Emma took a deep breath, closing the journal. She wasn't just holding James's past, she was holding the last piece of something he had never been able to finish. And now, she had to finish it for him. Emma sat on the dusty floor, the journal still clutched in her hands. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what James had discovered. If he had found his sister, why hadn't he told her? What had stopped him? The cat let out a low, almost expectant meow. She looked up, meeting its piercing green eyes. It had led her this far. It wasn't done yet. Emma flipped to the last page of the journal. There, written in James' unmistakable handwriting, was an address. She read it once, then again. The town was only an hour away. A chill ran down her spine. Had she really been this close all along? Had James's sister been just miles away, waiting for someone to find her? She stood abruptly, dusting off her hands. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She didn't have time for doubts, for hesitation. James had spent his life searching. She wouldn't let it end here. The drive was quiet, except for the steady hum of the road beneath her tires. The cat, to her surprise, had jumped into the passenger seat, curling up as if it had always belonged there. She didn't question it, not anymore. As she neared the address, her pulse quickened. The house was small, unassuming, tucked between others just like it. A single light glowed behind the curtains. Emma gripped the journal tightly as she stepped out of the car. She hesitated at the doorstep, her breath shallow. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she knocked. Footsteps. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman with soft, weathered features. Her gray eyes studied Emma with quiet curiosity. Emma swallowed. I think you knew James." The woman stiffened, her eyes widening at the name. Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then, barely a whisper. "James." Her voice cracked, raw with something Emma couldn't yet name. Emma slowly held out the journal, her fingers trembling. "He was looking for you," she said, her voice unsteady. "He never stopped." The woman's hands flew to her mouth, her breath hitching. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for the book, her fingers brushing against it as if touching a ghost. Emma knew in that moment that James had been right. He had found her. And now, so had she. The woman's hands trembled as she took the journal, holding it like something fragile, something sacred. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She ran her fingers over the worn leather cover, her breath unsteady. Then she opened it. Emma watched as her eyes moved over the pages, taking in James's words, the years of searching, the regret, the longing. Tears slipped down her wrinkled cheeks, silent but heavy with everything left unsaid. "I thought—" Her voice broke. She looked up at Emma, eyes glistening. "I thought he forgot about me." Emma shook her head, emotion swelling in her chest. "He never forgot. He never stopped looking." The woman let out a shuddering breath, gripping the journal as if she could pull James closer through the pages. "I waited for him," she whispered. "For so long, I waited." Emma felt the weight of those words settle deep inside her. The years lost, the moments stolen by time. James had spent his life searching, and his sister, his little sister, had spent hers waiting. "I don't understand," Emma said gently. "Why didn't he find you? He wrote that he finally did." The woman exhaled shakily. "I moved," she murmured. "A few weeks before he passed. I left that address behind thinking maybe he'd given up." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I didn't know he was that close." Emma's throat tightened. If only James had known. If only he had gotten just a little more time. The cat brushed against Emma's leg, grounding her in the moment. She glanced down at it, feeling a strange comfort in its presence. It had brought her here. It had finished what James had started. The woman wiped her tears, looking at Emma with something new in her eyes. "Hope. Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing him back to me even in this way." Emma smiled softly. She reached down, scooping up the cat. It purred against her chest, warm and steady. "I think," she said, running her fingers through its fur, "this little one deserves a home." The woman nodded, a small trembling smile appearing. "And I think," she said, holding the journal close to her heart, "James can finally rest." Emma felt it too. A quiet, gentle peace settling over her. Some stories don't get perfect endings, but sometimes, just sometimes, they find their way home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Some connections are never truly lost.